I sat down with Josh Frydenberg after this morning's economic update. Treasurer Josh Frydenberg, thanks very much for your time. We're facing the largest deficit since the Second World War. Do you feel at times like you're fighting a war in the face of this crisis?
Well, we certainly are. I mean, this is a flagless and a faceless enemy, the coronavirus, but it continues to spread far and wide. I mean, 1.6 million new cases last week globally. That's 3 times the daily rate of new cases that we saw back in April. Now, Australia has dealt better than nearly any other country with both the health and the economic initiatives that we have taken, but the harsh reality of what we're going through has played out in the budget bottom line, and that's reflected in the debt and deficit numbers we've released today.
But as you make the point, we're in the best position, fiscal position in the OECD. Are you willing to rack up more debt in order to save jobs?
Well, the coalition under Scott Morrison will do what is necessary to support the Australian people at these difficult times. I mean, given the uncertainty around the labour market and given the second spike of cases in Victoria, that was the context for our announcement just a few days ago about extending the JobKeeper payments. Now, currently it's supporting 3.5 million workers, 960,000 businesses, 30% of the pre-COVID private sector economy, and we're continuing it for another 6 months. That is a reflection of the challenges that we have. It's currently costing us $11 billion a month. It will cost us less in the next wave or the next phase as a result of reapplying the eligibility test. But the support, Kieran, will be there for those who need it.
Some economists are already saying that these numbers are optimistic, that they assume the worst is behind us. Is that a fair assessment?
No, I think they assume that we can, as a country, be effective in dealing with new cases that when they arrive, and New South Wales right now is seeking to do that. In Victoria, obviously, there were mistakes made. There needs to be lessons learnt. That state is 1/4 of the national economy, and it's effectively in lockdown for more than 5 million Victorians. The impact of that is very substantial, and we do know that there will be challenges ahead, but we've got the plan. We're implementing it on the health front. Other states and territories are opening up. Jobs are coming back. We saw that in the ABS data last week. And we're also obviously heavily investing in skills and infrastructure and in other areas.
But a stage 4 lockdown is very much a realistic proposition in Victoria. So, again, is this the best case scenario that we're seeing in terms of these numbers?
Well, again, no decision has been taken, as I understand it, from the Victorian government. Certainly no decision has been announced, and the numbers today reflect the decisions that have been taken.
In relation to the 4-year forward estimates, that's been the rule of thumb when it comes to treasurers.
For budgets.
And economic statements. I don't think there's been a 2-year cycle used for 30 years. Why did you do it?
Because there's great uncertainty at the current time, and we heard from Governor Phil Lowe of the Reserve Bank just days ago how difficult it is to provide forecasts in this environment. We've provided a 2-year forecast. We'll provide 4-year forecasts in the budget, which will be delivered on October the 6th. I would have loved to have delivered a budget in May, as was the original timing, and before COVID hit, even after the fires, we were still on track for that surplus. But obviously this is a very unprecedented time for the economy, for the Australian people, and that has required the budget to be delayed till October.
When you look at the medium to longer term, isn't it important to give Australians a sense of just how tough it is in that period in order to mobilise support for reform? Because presumably you are going to undertake proper reform in October.
Well, the first thing to say is significant reforms are already underway. We went to the last election, for example, with 3-stage tax cuts worth $158 billion. We legislated that effectively. One of the outcomes of that legislated tax plan is that we're creating one big tax bracket between $45,000 and $200,000, where 94% of Australian taxpayers, Kieran, will pay a marginal rate of no more than 30 cents in the dollar. Right now, that's 63% of taxpayers. So this is putting money into people's pockets. It's a comprehensive reform. What the Prime Minister has outlined in terms of industrial relations reform is through 5 different working groups, whether it's on the simplification of the award system, whether it's in relation to greenfield sites, casual workers, or whether it's the compliance side of things. We are focused on dealing with stakeholders appropriately to get the best possible outcomes. Infrastructure, we've brought forward nearly $4 billion worth of spending. On skills, we've announced a $2 billion package, underwriting a 50% wage subsidy of 180,000 apprentices. That is enormously important at this difficult time.
So progress being made there, but where does the revenue come from? Because
from growing the economy,
but you've got to broaden the base of revenue too, don't you? I spoke to your former boss, Mr. Howard, a month or so ago and asked him, does the GST need to be on the table? He said, yes, it does. Tax reform always has to be on the table. Is it?
Well, in terms of tax reform, I've just outlined a significant initiative that we've undertaken. And in terms of what we've done on company tax, we obviously tried with larger companies, but we were successful in legislating for businesses with a turnover less than $50 million, and that's over 3 million businesses are benefiting right now from lower tax rates. We've also announced the extension of the instant asset write-off up to $150,000 purchases and the accelerated depreciation at 50%.
They're all cuts. Where does the revenue come from?
Well, no, they're actually incentives. They're actually reforms. They're actually designed to encourage economic activity, and the greater the level of economic activity, the more revenue that comes in. That was how we effectively have grown this economy. We've encouraged people, we've provided incentives, we've reduced red tape, we're investing in infrastructure. The economy was 16% greater in size pre-COVID than it was when we came to government 6 years earlier. And we are determined to get people back in work even after this crisis.
But we're facing a once-in-a-generation crisis. And as your colleague in New South Wales says, Dominic Perrottet, it's not an opportunity, it's an obligation for reform. Are you willing to take on that obligation?
We're absolutely.
When we're talking about GST and broadening the base, because how else does the debt get repaid?
I'm not about to kickstart that debate, and as you would know, Dominic is one state, and there are other states who've said they don't support that change. So the states aren't even in agreement about getting more revenue from a tax that they collect everything. We collect it and they get everything from it. So in terms of the GST, it supports the states, and it's obviously based on the level of consumption. It's taken a hit in this update because there's lower consumption across the economy as a function or as a feature of what has transpired with the coronavirus.
Did you consider extending the higher support for businesses in Victoria, given the shutdown there, and not to reduce the JobKeeper payments in order to support them, given they're obviously in a much tougher spot than the rest of the country?
Well, what we've designed with the JobKeeper program is a demand-driven one. So where there is greater demand, there will be more businesses and therefore more employees who are benefiting from those payments. Right now in Victoria, there's about 975,000 employees workers that are on JobKeeper. My expectation is, as a function of what has transpired now, is that more of those businesses will be eligible for the JobKeeper payment in the extended period after September. We'll have to wait and see, but some of those businesses, obviously now receiving JobKeeper, will need to continue to receive it going forward.
But did you consider maintaining a higher level of support, given how bad things are in your home state?
We were always focused on a transition. At $11 billion a month, this is a program that cannot continue indefinitely at that rate. We're also focused, Kieran, on a two-tiered payment to better reflect what some employers were receiving in the pre-COVID period, because, as you know, at a flat $1,500 payment, the money got out the door quickly, but for many, there was an overpayment or an income transfer compared to what their pre-COVID income was. So we talked to Treasury, they did a review, we've come up with some modifications, and that's what we've announced.
My understanding is that the Victorian authorities are planning, at least at the senior official level, for a possible stage 4 lockdown. Have you been briefed on that scenario?
They haven't told me that scenario. Obviously, they will take those decisions as they've taken their previous decisions, and it will be based on medical advice, as it always should be.
Would it be better to do that and embrace a short-term lockdown, as harsh as it might be, comparable to that as we saw in New Zealand, in order to not see it drag out for months and months and months?
I'll leave that to the medical experts.
In relation to our biggest trading partner, again, John Howard made some comments about that recently. He spoke about President Xi Jinping and said that, called him out as a bully, but he also went on to say we must remember the end game, and the end game is to maintain the maximum extent consistent with our values, a good economic relationship with China. As the person who balances the nation's books, do you agree with him?
Absolutely. Values drives policies, it drives approaches, it drives bilateral and multilateral relationships. Our economic partnership with China is absolutely critical to our nation. It's worth more than $200 billion a year. China benefits greatly from our iron ore, which supplies more than 60% of their needs, and our LNG, more than 45% of their needs. That helps drives their industrial expansion. At the same time, we benefit greatly from China's demand from our exports and obviously from their imports too to this country. So it's a mutually beneficial economic partnership, and I want that to continue.
Is it time for the Morrison government to try and get things back on an even keel in that relationship? I know that largely the Australian government hasn't been the catalyst for a lot of the problems in it. It's been assertiveness out of Beijing and so on, but do you want to see that cool down a bit?
Well, Kieran, I think that's the key point, is that our positions have not changed. We continue to seek a strong and a positive and a mutually beneficial relationship with China. Now, that does mean defending our interests, making our points of difference clear and consistent, and we'll continue to do that. And we don't have any regrets, for example, for calling for an independent inquiry into the outbreak of the coronavirus. I mean, look at the pain it's caused, both on the economic side as well as on the health side, and countries are not through this, and it's only fair that the appropriate international agency undertakes that review.
Treasurer, thanks for your time.